see, this is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm bringing you a double book review of two YA novels that have fantasy elements. The first of the two that I'm going to talk about is going to be the more recently released one. This is The Hazel Wood by Melissa Albert. This is an ARC copy that I won in a Goodreads giveaway. This was a very hyped debut novel, so I went into it with some caution because I didn't really have any particular expectations. I hadn't heard much about it, but for me, a hyped YA debut fantasy is really a coin toss. It can really go either way. Fortunately, I did end up being really pleased with this one. And then the second book I'm going to review is Wild Beauty by McLemore, which was a 2017 release that I read I think back in February, and I've been meaning to do my full review ever since. This book has really stuck with me. I loved her previous novel, When the Moon Was Ours. I still haven't read her debut, The Weight of Feathers, but I did go into this one with very high expectations, and it definitely lived up to them. So, starting with The Hazel Wood, this definitely feels in some ways like a book of two halves, even though it's hard to tell exactly where one half leaves off and the other begins. Though you'll probably know when picking it up that this is a fantasy novel, it spends a lot of time being really contemporary first. A lot of the fun for me was watching how the story gradually slides into weird, dark fairy tale fantasy, and just how far in that direction it actually goes from such mundane beginnings. So all of Alice's life, she has lived with her mother, and they have always been on the move, running from bad luck that seems to catch up with them if they ever stay too long in one place. This itinerant life has left Alice really unmoored. Her memories a mismatched patchwork of people, places, and events, and she has a deep-seated anger that's constantly reasserting itself. Alice has never met her grandmother, the renowned author Althea Proserpine, nor has she been allowed to read her book of dark fairy tales, Tales from the Hinterland. But following the news of Althea's death, Alice's mother has finally allowed the two of them to settle down in New York, where they live with Alice's new stepfather and stepsister in upper-class luxury that feels completely foreign to her. And then strange events start happening, as you probably knew they would. After her mother goes missing, Alice receives some clues that point her toward her grandmother's book, which is disturbingly hard to track down a copy of, given that sales back in the day funded Althea's purchase of an estate in upstate New York called the Hazel Wood. Alice reluctantly enlists the help of a boy from her elite high school named Ellery Finch, who knows a good deal more about Tales from the Hinterland than Alice does. But he has his own internal struggles and family strife that he's contending with. Their search brings Alice and Finch from rare book dealers to fairy tale fanatics to the Hazel Wood itself and, well, beyond. And I think the less said about that beyond, perhaps the better. Melissa Albert may be a debut author, but her narrative voice is really quite sophisticated. From the start, Alice's story is riddled with the sort of poignant, elegant sentences that invite you to pause and appreciate the author's craft. There's also a definite fondness for the literary world here, especially that of fairy tales and fantasy. Albert finds excuses to name-drop works by authors from Angela Carter to Nnedi Okorafor and beyond. This is a book for book people, and let's face it, we're all book people here, right? If I have a complaint, it's that Alice's very real and very emotional struggles with her past, her mother, and her anger are all done a little bit of a disservice when Albert starts providing magical explanations for the things that have been troubling Alice in her normal life. So I felt oddly let down by a couple of the reveals. But there are also ways that this story and its resolution diverged from expectations that I found really refreshing and welcome. Melissa Albert is a little bit of a literary tease here because she'll leave you with a keen desire to actually read the dark and twisted stories of Tales from the Hinterland. Fortunately for us, she does seem to have a book deal lined up to publish this in-universe tie-in book. I am more cautious about news of a planned sequel. I read The Hazelwood as a standalone, and I like it as a standalone. I am happy with the resolutions that Albert gives her characters in this book, so I am sitting here kind of hoping that the next book will follow a different set of characters instead of being a continuation of Alice's story. So I gave The Hazelwood a 4 out of 5 stars. I was pleased with it. I think if you've finished this book and you have a hankering for the type of fairy tales that Tales from the Hinterland seems to be, I do have a book recommendation for you. I recently finished A Feast of Sorrows by Angela Slatter, which is a book of dark, beautifully written adult creepy fairy tales. And if you happen to be looking for something like Tales from the Hinterland, this is the direction I would point you in. So next I am going to talk about Wild Beauty. And I have been thinking about how I wanted to review this book for a long time, because I think that a straightforward description of the premise of Wild Beauty is insufficient to convey what this book actually accomplishes. Anna Marie McLemore's elegant, romantic, magical realism inches a little closer to straightforward fantasy here than it did in When the Moon Was Ours, with characters whose magic has rules and guidelines that create inherent conflict. But there are many more layers to this story than at first meet the eye. The Nomeolvides women are a multi-generational family of Latina cousins, 5 per generation, with a magical gift, a magical curse, and an inextricable connection to the estate called La Pradera, where they live but which they do not own. As family legend has it, generations of Nomeolvides women were chased out of town after town accused of being witches until they finally found a safe haven at La Pradera. The rules: Nomeolvides women can coax flowers out of the ground at will. They make La Pradera's gardens a wondrous paradise, but in return they cannot leave. If they flee the estate, it will kill them, and most painfully, anyone they fall too deeply in love with will magically disappear. La Pradera belongs to the wealthy white Briar family, but until now, the estate has been left to some of the family's cast-off members. The estate's elderly owner, Marjorie, has recently died, and her granddaughter, Bay, considered illegitimate by the distant Briars, is supposed to inherit. The youngest generation of Nomeolvides women are all roughly in their teens and early 20s, and all 5 of them, it turns out, are a little bit in love with Bay Briar. So at the beginning of the book, they make a plan to protect Bay from their family's curse by sacrificing beloved possessions to the gardens and asking the land to spare her. But then one of the girls, Estrella, discovers a boy who has seemingly emerged from the earth after this ritual. The boy, whom they call Fel, seemingly comes from a previous century. He has no memories of his past life, but is plagued by a sense of guilt, and the feeling that even in this beautiful place with these caring people, he's somehow being punished for sins that he can't remember. Into all of this comes another member of the Briar family, Reed, with a challenge to Bay's claim to the land. As Reed asserts control over La Pradera, things begin to change. He sees the Nomeolvides women not as equals, but as assets to be exploited, since, as you'll recall, they cannot leave. This is the story of Estrella's coming of age, and of Fel's reckoning with the history he embodies, and the fight for the future of the Nomeolvides women and their home. McLemore consistently addresses both issues of race and sexuality in various characters' storylines. All 5 of the Nomeolvides girls are portrayed as bisexual. Bay is definitely queer, possibly genderqueer, I'm not quite certain. The main romance is between a bisexual girl and a boy, that's Estrella and Fel, and I know that that is a type of bi rep that certain people are really looking for in books right now. And there is also a romance storyline between Bae and one of the other No Me Olvides girls. But this isn't just a story of love, heartbreak, and family legacy. It's also a story of power and exploitation of labor, especially when it comes to uprooted Latinx workers who find themselves dependent on others for a place to live and work. There's a big reveal that happens quite late in the book that's a major game changer, not just in terms of the plot, but in terms of understanding what this book is really about. And I find myself tiptoeing around it in order to try to explain what is so important about Wild Beauty. There are running themes here about memory. No Me Olvides means forget-me-not, after all. About the histories that are forgotten, the reasons they're obliterated, and what it takes to bring them back to light. If you squint at it sideways, there are maybe fairy tale echoes of Sleeping Beauty, not just in the floral imagery, but in the idea of something that has lain dormant for 100 years hidden behind the briars. There's a reckoning to be had here between the land, those who live on it, and those who own it. And I will tell you, it changes everything. The moments when some of the pieces came together were deeply emotional for me and took my breath away. In short, I loved this book, and I gave it 5 stars. It absolutely lived up to the high expectations that I had for it. And that is all for my double review today. Let me know if you've read either of these books and what you think of them. Let me know if you're planning to read them. Anyhow, I hope you're having a very nice day. That is all. Bye for now.